If you've been working in the world of freelance digital marketing for a few months, you will have built up, hopefully, a good few clients. So if everything has been going well, one of the great things that can happen is that a client can turn around and ask you if you have any more hours available, either for a new service which they're looking at expanding into, or whether they just need additional support on the things that you're already doing for them. Now, this is something which is covered in the upselling lesson, so it can work both ways in terms of you asking the client and the client asking you. And in most instances, it's great to be able to say yes. Now, one of the things which I learned from this though, is as great as that is, and it is genuinely good if this happens, is that subsequently, if they turn around and ask for more hours beyond that, or have an additional client, underneath them that they want you to work on, this can lead to a case of having all your eggs in one basket. Ultimately, it's the fact of how much money you are getting in off the basis of one client and how much that contributes to your overall income. The perfect examples for this are working with other marketing agencies. Because they have clients of their own, they can say, you can take care of this client. Then subsequently, you can take care of this client and this client and this client. So you have the relationships with each of those individual clients. Ultimately, it all rests on the actual relationship you have with the marketing agency. What can happen is that for one reason or another, whether they want to change things around or whether something doesn't go quite right with that relationship, is that suddenly if you lose them as a client, you subsequently lose 4 clients that are connected to them. Now, that is not a good position to be in, but as I say, it's very determined by the level of income which they are bringing in for you. Whether you're looking at working with a marketing agency or just with a very big client, because the same thing can happen, is that you need to be very cautious about whether or not you actually take them on or whether or not you expand your hours to accommodate what they're asking for. So to give you an example, one of my friends who's also a freelancer had 4 clients, and that was all he had. They were big clients, they were paying really well. And after a couple of years, one of the clients decided they were actually going to take their marketing in-house. They were doing well enough that they could hire someone full-time. So as a result of that, my friend automatically lost 25% of his work and therefore 25% of his income overnight, just off the back of one client. Now, depending on where you are in business, that is a huge amount of money to suddenly lose overnight and can fill you with a lot of negative emotions as to how you go about trying to win more work to kind of fill that gap that you've suddenly been left with. If a client is really secure and you're contracted in for a long period of time, then the risk of this happening is less, but it doesn't mean to say that it can never happen. So one of the things which I've been particularly conscious of is in those instances where clients have turned around to me and said, can you take on more work, or can I introduce you to this client that I'm also working on, is to take a step back and work out whether or not it's actually more risk averse to work with another client who's completely independent of that. For me, my personal limit is not taking on any more than 25 hours with any one given client. Although if I'm honest with you, I'm bringing that number down slightly more recently. That leaves me with, crudely about 120 hours in a given working month, so that any 25-hour client represents about 20% of my total income and total work. The clients that I work with on that level are contracted in and they are very secure as much as I can tell. You never know when it is going to happen, but if in the event that they decide to pull the plug on the relationship I have with them, then ultimately that means I lose 20% of my working hours. Now, that is a level of risk which I feel happy with. Anything more I would feel particularly uneasy about, but that is the level of risk which I feel comfortable with. That doesn't mean to say that those numbers are the same numbers which you should feel comfortable with. Ultimately, you might decide you have 2 clients and it's 50-50 split. Or alternatively, you could look at, say, having 20 clients. It mitigates the risk and does create other issues, but it means you are spreading your bets in terms of who stays and who goes. Now, all of this stems back to those strategic reasons as to why you wanted to go freelance in the first place. Whether you've got the opportunity to continue to expand hours with an existing client or take on a new one has advantages and disadvantages. The ultimate advantages is that you already know the client, you're already doing the work, so doing more of it is a very easy thing to do for more money. However, that can also potentially limit the number of opportunities you're ever going to experience with them. You're not going to get more introductions from a client simply because you've upped your hours from 10 to 20. It's still going to be the same client. So for me, as I said way back in the first lessons of this course, one of the key reasons why I went freelancing was so I could expose myself to more different opportunities out there. So actually by taking on more hours with a client limits that. Ideally, I'd like to be able to connect with another client that time, although it's well paid and although it is easy work, is essentially taking me away from, because I wouldn't be able to have the time and the capacity and the resource to be able to work with other clients in the future. So there's all those kinds of questions and things that you need to consider if a client does ever approach you for more hours. In the early days, it can make a lot of sense, but it's one of those things where when you quite quickly become established and have a fairly decent client base, it can create a lot more challenges than you were perhaps thinking about way back at the start.